down some good examples of defensive driving. Now, this is probably one of the times when I actually get it right. We don't always get it right because when you are under immense pressure whilst holding onto the lead with something like a Nissan behind you, you've got to make sure you keep your cool. You've got to keep thinking about the bigger picture. But when you're under pressure, it's so easy to get severe tunnel vision and you just get this very narrow focus and you miss the wider picture. So what are the things that are really important? Well, when you start looking at the distance between us two and P3, they're only just round the corner. And so if you defend far too aggressively with 5 laps to go, P3 and P4 are very rapidly, and P5 are going to close in to you two leading the race. And you just do not want to start including more cars into this mess, because it starts to get really ugly. So you need to defend, but you also need to make sure that your lap times don't diminish too much and the rest of the field closes in. And this is something that people really miss with defensive driving. They defend so hard that instead of having to keep one person behind them, all of a sudden there's 2, 3, 4 drivers all over the place, and that's when stuff gets really ugly. And you also have to think about where you are. So if you've got 5 laps to go, then seriously aggressive defensive driving is not the approach, because you still need to create that buffer between P3, 4 and so on, or whatever your track position is. And you also need to think about the fact that, let's say you are these guys here, okay? P3 wants to defend against P4, but at the same time he doesn't want to lose P1 and P2, because he's racing for the win. He's not racing for anything other than the win. So he needs to successfully defend against P4, but without losing touch with P1 and P2. So let's sort of talk about that. So what I'm going to do is play a clip of a good example of defensive driving. I'm the one doing the defensive driving, and it's one of the few times I actually get it right. I don't always get it right, but let's check it out. And then we will break down the mindset, what I was thinking and how I was approaching it. So yeah, let's check it out, and we'll go from here. So we know we've got a Nissan breathing down, I know it's going to be all over us. So for sure, coming up here, I definitely want to cover the inside. I absolutely do. I just want to make sure I don't outbrake myself. That's kind of obvious. That's easily done. But here's where it really matters. Now, yeah, I don't really want to approach this coming corner right on the inside. I just don't, because it's too much time lost. So we let him through, but we do the old switcheroo. Literally textbook switcheroo right there. That's how it's done. And it's really difficult to get it right. We look from a driver's perspective. Absolutely on the money, back on the traction. Voila. So let's break down why I chose to do what I was doing in this situation. So let's think about this. Nissan, brutal top speed. It's going to be all over the back of me on the end of both straights. So for sure, I want to defend coming into turn 1. Absolutely, because the probability that I'll get back past on the next straight is not very high, because the Nissan is just too fast. So I'm going to defend on the inside here and just hold the line, just make sure I don't miss the brake point. I don't want to turn out. Something that I used to do myself, which was a bit of a mistake, is when I hit the brakes, I'd then steer over to the left to try and get a better entrance. But you can't do that, because you have to give room. Let's have a look, looking on the rear. You have to give room. I don't know why it won't let me look behind, unfortunately. That's a shame. So we will look at it from... never mind. So let's just carry on. Point is, you have to give room on the left-hand side. You can't move across and close the gap and ultimately put their wheel on the green AstroTurf, because then they start sliding around, you're going to have an unhappy driver. So you've got to give room. It's a very easy mistake to make there. Now, when we carry on, when we're going up here, now, sure, at this point, I see the Nissan absolutely closing in, and I could go defensive, but is it worth it at this stage in the race when we've got P3 and 4 so close? I didn't think so. I just didn't think it was worth going such hard defence so early on. So the plan I had was to basically try and go for the switcheroo, and I'll explain why I went for the switcheroo. But what you want to do is, I'll go to my normal braking point, would be here. Okay? Now, I would already be hard on the brakes at this point, but instead I decided to brake just a fraction later. So basically the latest possible braking I can muster to make this corner. But instead of trail braking, I'd hold the brake flat for longer. And the reason why I do this is it would have the effect on the Nissan driver. Look, he's still hard on the throttle. He's trying to out-brake me to get up the inside. So if I brake at the latest possible point, I might just tempt him into braking just a bit later, and thus too late to hold the inside line, so I could get up the inside. Now, it's a bit of a gamble, but the probability that you're going to hold the outside here is less likely, and the reason is P2 led most of the race, and so this would have been one of the first laps that he had a slipstream toe coming into this corner, so it's more likely he will misjudge the braking point, because he has to judge an earlier braking point because of the extra slipstream, but he also has to judge when to brake late enough to cover the inside, you see. So based on that, it paid off. So he's hard on the brakes, really trying to slow the car down. He's still hard on the brakes, he's not even lifting yet, whereas if you look at myself, I'm starting to lift. And so what it enables is just this really nicely timed switcheroo. And the other reason why I wanted to go for the switcheroo is because of two distinct advantages and disadvantages between the two cars. Inch perfect, absolutely inch perfect. And so the distinct difference between the two cars is that the AMG has got really solid traction, whereas the Nissan, we know, in first and second gear is a really difficult car to handle. And so coming out of this corner, turn 2, the probability that I'm going to get even better traction coming up the inside and ultimately squirt ahead of the Nissan was much higher. The only thing remaining was keeping my cool and being precise and not pushing too hard or forcing anything. And the net result is we retained position. And that was really the key, is retaining position without losing too much speed. I don't have to cover defensively every single thing that people go for. And that there is an example of good defensive driving, because even here he went for the inside, but I didn't necessarily dart across to cover it. You know, I've seen a lot of times where what I do is, let's say we're coming up the inside here, I'll position my car for two reasons. Reason number one is to basically put off the person who's in front of me and maybe make them make a mistake. The other reason is sometimes, not always, but sometimes, I need a better view to find my braking point. When you're on the bumper cam, and all you can see sometimes when you're really close is, I mean, I'm exaggerating a bit, but that's all you can see. You're like, so it's really easy to miss your braking point. So that's another thing to think about. But that doesn't mean that I see him coming up the inside, I'm going to dart across and cover it as aggressively as possible, just in case. It's not worth it, because then both of you end up in such a mess that all of a sudden, yeah, these three guys are going to be breathing down your neck, and you just don't want that. You've worked so hard to build up a gap and a cushion. So, you know, the question is, what's better? Finishing in P2, a strong P2, or completely messing it up, getting tangled up with all the other guys, and finishing either third, fourth, fifth, or even last, because you end up in the gravel because of three wide, you know, going into a corner three wide. You know, it gets tricky. And there's actually a really good example later on when these three guys were battling, and I want to analyse that as well with respect to defensive driving. So let's try and find that. Look, they're already closing in. We don't want them to close in, that's the thing. But there was a situation here. Here we go. So this is the kind of mess you don't want to be getting involved with. And ultimately it meant that us two could pull away again, which is what you don't want. So you have to be smart with when you go for an overtake, when you aggressively defend. You've got to really think about the bigger picture. Supremely important. Here we go. This is when things started getting hairy. Look, whoo, one person's gone. And that, I mean, big F, really. Really sucks for IC Slent, I think went off, yeah. And that's exactly what you want to avoid. Exactly what you want to avoid. And so when you're doing your defensive driving, you got to think about the bigger picture. You got to think, you know, at what cost am I going to defend so aggressively? Because if you're thinking about trying to raise your driver rating and skill rating, it's better to come home having conceded one position, retain or improve your driver rating a little bit, and live to fight in the top lobbies another day. And that would be a much, much better approach. So yeah, that was a short lesson on how to do defensive driving properly. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you again soon. Cheers.